And I think the summer of my 16th birthday, I was using benzos, which are very similar to alcohol. And I remember almost nothing from that entire summer. It was scary. I was filled with a lot of shame, and that shame just, from doing things out of line with my values, then I had things that I judged to be like more appropriate excuses to use drugs and alcohol. Like the things that most people go to drugs and alcohol for, I was starting to do those sorts of things. I felt ashamed of myself. I felt like I felt really unsafe and uncomfortable in my body. I didn't feel like the kid that I grew up to be, the person I was raised to be. And I started to have all of these things that I felt like I had to run from.
The journey started at 9 years old. I had my first drink of alcohol by myself on my 9th birthday. And I remember taking a shot of whiskey, feeling for the first time that I was accepted and really comfortable in my body. So Mike, later in life, you came to face addiction. And I would love for you to share the beginning of that journey, starting at just 9 years old.
It was my 9th birthday, and I was having a slumber party at my grandma's, and we were in the pool house, and two of the people at the party were my older cousin and an older friend on my baseball team. And we were behind the cabinet. We're sleeping like all over this pool house, all of these like not 8 or 9 year old boys. And I think my dad was sleeping on the couch at one end of it. And me and the two older boys were behind the cabinet, and one of them was opening up all of the drawers, and he found an unopened bottle of Jack Daniels. And he said, "Man, we should take some shots." And me being a normal, young kid that wants to fit in, also having an intense desire to fit in beyond what I think is normal and the willingness to do whatever it took, I instantly said, "Okay, sure, of course we should." And we went and we took 2 shots of alcohol. And as I described in that quote, I felt this rush of warmth from the whiskey, and I felt the respect that I had from these older guys. And that was the epitome of success for 9-year-old me. And that experience was imprinted in my mind as a strategy I could use to get admiration from people that I wanted admiration from, or acceptance or respect, or people to like me. And I just copied and pasted that strategy for years, and it worked extremely well.
And where do you think that intense desire to fit in came from, particularly as you said, like it was almost like an abnormal, like it was like almost more than what most people feel?
I'm definitely still trying to figure that out. I've done so much work on myself, so much therapy, and I don't know that I'll ever have crystal clear clarity on that. But what I think it was is partly genetic. Like I was always extremely sensitive. I could remember from a very young age, just crying very easily. Like it felt really inappropriate, the times where I would feel really emotional, whether someone like kind of nudged me or looked at me the wrong way. I was just super, super sensitive. And so part of that might be genetic. And other than that, I really don't know. I feel like it started out as a pretty normal childhood experience. And once I found that strategy, I just overused it.
And when you starting at 9 years old, having your first drink and feeling that warmth, did it also affect that feeling of sensitivity? Like, did it sort of numb that feeling? Because I certainly can relate to a feeling of sensitivity to an extent. And sometimes it does. It feels really raw. It's like you're thin-skinned with everything that you do. And something like alcohol certainly does kind of like, it takes the edge off that experience.
100%. And the biggest way that showed up is numbing social anxiety. and social sensitivity, if you will. So in a social setting, in a party, or honestly, eventually even at school, I was using drugs all the time. It just helped me feel a little more comfortable in my skin. And that helped me get through life for sure. But at times it would still, like, all of this emotion would bubble up and it would just explode. I remember just dozens and dozens of times going to my bathroom and sobbing for hours. So it definitely couldn't numb it all, but it did for a certain period of time.
Yeah. So how does that sort of manifest into an addiction? So you get your introduction to something that people associate more of a negative addiction to, which is alcohol. How does that manifest sort of in your teenage years as you sort of start becoming more of an adult?
I think I went through a typical progression. I went from alcohol to smoking weed, and then I tried some pills. And up to this point, it's still very casual. I'm only doing it in social settings. But as soon as I found painkillers and benzodiazepines, drugs that have a propensity for physical addiction, then I was really screwed. I sought these things out at first just to fit in, but then I was using them so often with my friends that I started becoming physically addicted. Then there was a part of me that kind of on the side that started to see myself more as a drug user, and to, I don't know if I've ever shared this. I think part of it was like to prove to myself that I was hardcore and I was like a druggie. I thought that was cool. I started to use drugs on my own, not really wanting to that badly, but in order to like prop up my own ego and this own sense of this new identity that I was trying to form. I started to use drugs on my own, and that just made me spiral out of control a lot more quickly. Once I found pills, I think within 6 months, I was using them daily. And I think the summer of my 16th birthday, I was using benzos, which are very similar to alcohol. And I remember almost nothing from that entire summer. It was scary. I was filled with a lot of shame, and that shame just, from doing things out of line with my values, then I had things that I judged to be like more appropriate excuses to use drugs and alcohol. Like the things that most people go to drugs and alcohol for, I was starting to do those sorts of things. I felt ashamed of myself. I felt like I felt really unsafe and uncomfortable in my body. I didn't feel like the kid that I grew up to be, the person I was raised to be. And I started to have all of these things that I felt like I had to run from.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because, you start off as someone that's incredibly sensitive and sort of, turn into this older version of someone that wants to be like the harder person. It's almost the opposite to who you initially identified with. But then there's always kind of that tipping point where it always tends to go a little too far. And then you find yourself sort of back in that vulnerable position again.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Exactly.
So what does that sort of look like, that transition between, because I do feel like this is quite common. Like I remember growing up and, there would be drugs around, different types of drugs. And, there was kind of that casual setting to it. It was kind of like the party thing. It was what people did on weekends and, to relax and have fun and all these things. Sort of, when was the point for you? Like, do you remember the specific moment when you were like, hang on, like this is no longer for the enjoyment or for this sense of identity that I'm trying to prove myself, but like I'm actually really like starting to become an addict in what, people, I guess, term an addict?
Mm-hmm. I think it was a series of different things. It was getting busted by my school and my parents numerous times, failing drug tests for them, getting pulled over by the cops half a dozen times, totaling a car, and then starting to realize that there was one common denominator, and it was my drug use. And I remember having very brief moments, very like sober moments knowing that that was the problem and knowing that I was out of control. And then I would forget it so quickly and I would justify. And it was all driven by this absolute need to maintain the identity and maintain my level of acceptance and my reputation with my peer group. I read this book recently called Hold On to Your Kids by Gabor Mate. And he talks about the transition in our culture in like Western society from an adult-centered orientation to a peer-centered orientation, where many generations ago, kids had so much respect, admiration, and they just looked up to their parents in a completely different way than we do today. And for so many reasons now, we start to look to our peers for, we become attached to our peers, and then we look to them for as a compass in life. And by that point, probably starting at 9, I started to form attachments with my peers. I started to look to them for how to navigate the world. And by the time I was 16 or 17, I just didn't have the same respect for my parents anymore, for their values. And so the idea of stopping using drugs it felt probably similar to like leaving my family, if you will.
So with shame, it's certainly something that I'm very intrigued about, because I feel like, we all feel it at some points in our life, and it can certainly, if we don't address it, it can manifest in ways that I don't think is very good for our life. What would you say, like if there was any listener here that is experiencing addiction and does feel like a sense of lack of control and from that shame, and I think particularly shame tends to come in addiction when, as you said, you kind of get this, like off the drugs, you get this clarity, this sense of like empowerment, like I don't want to do this. I'm like very conscious that this is taking over my life, but then it kind of is a slippery slope back into it. What would be something that I guess you would tell maybe your younger self when he was kind of in that, feeling that shame?
I don't know if anything could have gotten through to younger me. I think I needed to get punched in the mouth a number of times.
A little uppercut.
Maybe. I'm not sure. However, the advice that I would give is to talk to someone that you trust. Admit to someone that you trust that you're struggling, that you feel out of control, that you feel like you're addicted, that you're powerless over drug and alcohols. Whatever feels true for you, pick someone in your life, and that could be a professional, that could be finding a therapist, that could be going to an AA meeting or a Narcotics Anonymous meeting or any number of groups. But start to admit to someone how you're feeling, because as maybe Brene Brown started this, secrecy or shame breeds on secrecy and silence. It lives and it grows in the shadows. So as soon as we start to share with other people what we're experiencing, we get to take some of the load off. We get to see the reflection through their words that we're still accepted. If it's a healthy relationship, it's a healthy person that you're speaking to, you will see that you're still accepted, you're still loved, you're still worthy despite your addiction. And from that place, from feeling whole already, it makes it so much easier to heal from there, rather than what we've been told for so long is we're only accepted if we're sober. That's the like tough love form of recovery, is that we've been taught to treat addicts as we only love you if you're sober.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I know with Gabor's work, he calls it like compassionate inquiry, and just like the practice of listening to someone that's in that position is so healing. Because I think, when we see particularly people that we care about struggling with something, we always go into fix it mode, and we just like, we take that responsibility on. We're like, we need to fix this. How do we fix this? And it's like, I feel like it's almost a step too far. And it's just so powerful to just be able to sit and hold space with someone that's really going through a challenging experience and just listen, whether you agree with them or not, but just like validate their feelings, like just really be there and just truly try to understand, okay, this person feels this way and this is why they're doing these things.
Amen. Yeah, I think it's so much more powerful to allow people to come to their own conclusions or find their own answers than to give advice and try to fix them, like you're talking about. Because when they come to their own solutions, they have so much more motivation and ownership over their direction. And to do that, to hold space for someone without trying to fix, takes a lot of courage, because you may think, or you may actually have a great solution for them, but it takes courage to be willing to just sit there and let them potentially make a lot more mistakes in order to develop their own self-esteem by finding their own solutions.
So something that I found very interesting about your story that you actually, well, I haven't heard too much, is that you were actually sober for 5 years and then decided that you were in a position where you could start to, have a drink now and then. Could you talk me through that process? Because, the common story that I always hear with someone that has sort of experienced addiction is they sort of have to go to the opposite side of the spectrum and just not touch anything sort of for the rest of their lives.
Mm-hmm. I think that is the case for a lot of people. They should probably never experiment or bring back any level of substance use. And I'm not sure exactly why that is and why I might be different. It could be a number of different things. For me, at about the 4-year mark, I started to feel like, or the seed of this idea popped into my head, that I don't identify with the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous anymore, which is we admitted that we were powerless over drugs and alcohol, or powerless over alcohol. I didn't identify with that anymore. The story that started to become louder is, I feel like I've dealt with the underlying issues and I'll probably be fine if I use some things socially or recreationally, and very carefully. And I didn't do anything with that idea for quite a while. I talked to my therapist. I talked to all of my best friends that were all in recovery at that point. And no one really knew what to tell me. No one condoned it. Most people didn't strike it down as a terrible idea, but definitely no one condoned it. And then finally, one night I had a friend over. He had a big bag of weed on the table. He went to the bathroom, so I stole a little nug from him. And that night I rolled a joint by myself. I smoked it. It felt great. And for the next week, I was just kind of twiddling my thumbs, like, okay, am I going to relapse? Is this going to be really terrible? And I was probably at like a 4 or 5 out of 10 scared. And then the rest was like confident in my decision. And that was around 8 or 10 years ago. And I've just continued to get healthier and healthier. And to be completely honest, I've had a couple moments in there that were, I wouldn't say scary, but they were, I've made some mistakes where I haven't remained vigilant with substance use, and I've done some things that have seemed like, oh, I'm moving in a bad direction. Luckily, I've developed a really positive and supportive community and support system around me, to where I always feel like as soon as I become aware that I'm moving in a negative direction, I can admit that and I get support really, really quickly. And my wife has been my biggest supporter of all time. She's just so calm, cool, and collected anytime I've admitted that I've been doing something that I don't want to do, like hiding kratom use. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but like it's a really mild substance. But recently I admitted to her that I was using some of that behind her back. And she didn't shame me for a second. She thanked me for sharing it with her. She wasn't reactive, despite, all of the reasons in the world for her to be angry or scared. And her responding like that time and a number of times, and since I've known her, continue to help me heal. It continues to show me that she loves me no matter what. And it allows me to continue to improve and let go of any addictive tendency that I have. So all of that to say, I at some point made just an impulsive decision, because I never knew for sure that I would be okay. And nothing, like the sky didn't fall, nothing went wrong. And over time, I started to experiment with some things socially. And then at some point, I started to use some things in more of an intentional way for personal development and growth, which has been a really huge part of my journey.
So when you had those, few moments more recently where you're like, okay, like I feel like I'm starting to go in more of a, negative direction, does it stem from like a similar thought pattern to when you were like in your teenage years, or has it sort of developed into something different?
I think it's exactly the same.
Yeah,
And now it's just like, it's like 1/100th of the intensity. But if I really double click on like what's going on, why I'm so what happened is I would use like a very small amount of this stuff that produces a mild amount of relaxation or euphoria, in the afternoon or evening when I'm done working several times a week, and I would hide it from a D. There's like, why I'm using it is to feel like some level of euphoria. And then B, I think it's to mask boredom, like just mask some low level boredom in my life. And then it becomes just a little, like a tick, like a little compulsion that it's not providing me almost any value at all, but it gives me a level of control over my state of consciousness that I've come to rely on over the years. And so if I feel boredom or loneliness or anger, I just always know in the back of my mind, a lot of times in this unconscious part of my mind, that, oh, I can do something about that. I can control that right now through some sort of substance use. I'm so fortunate that nowadays the intensity of my substance, like if it gets out of control, it's with like caffeine or nicotine mints or this thing called kratom. So it's very, it's not having a big effect on my life at all. But it's something that I intend to squash in my lifetime. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to do it, but I always have some level of attention on trying to heal that part of myself.
Yeah, you mentioned caffeine, and I think that's a funny one, because I think when we speak about sort of these negative addictions, caffeine kind of gets put to the side as if it's like, oh, no, like that's just normal. Everybody does that.
Yeah.
I only started drinking coffee about 5 years ago now. And I think because of that, I have a sensitivity to it. And I had to be really conscious of it, because it does sort of give me almost that euphoric feeling to an extent, just like having a cup of coffee. And I remember I was living overseas a couple of years ago, and I would almost start drinking it, like having a couple of cups a day, purely because of this boredom. And it's quite interesting. It's like, okay, it might not be like a painkiller or, something that's giving me this like little element of euphoria, but we always find these sort of different mechanisms to kind of give us something. And I think we have to be very conscious of that. Just as much as it comes down to having, a coffee a day or whatever it is. I actually saw, I think on one of your Instagram posts, you had said that like people were surprised with how much coffee you could drink and still function really well. So obviously it manifests in that direction at times.
Yep.
So I would love to take a slight turn, because obviously like there is a massive part of your journey that is just absolutely incredible. And that is moving into the space of CrossFit. And I would love to know, like, how do you sort of come from being someone that's, been in rehab, like you've been in recovery, you've gone through this like really deep experience that I think obviously, as you said, has been both sort of harmful and healing all at the same time. What pulled you to CrossFit, and particularly what made you so good? Because I think, we can train, but there's like a driver behind being able to train that hard and that well to be so good at something.
Mm-hmm. I got into it kind of by accident. I had just run a marathon and I was sick of running. I had no idea. I had like no direction in my physical world, like no goals, if you will. And a new friend of mine invited me to a CrossFit gym. I had never heard of it. And I show up and I'm feeling like the freaking man because I had just won my age division in this marathon I ran. So I just felt on top of the world. I'm so conditioned. I'm the youngest guy here. And I placed last next to a probably 60-year-old woman in this workout. Legit. It was so humbling. It was so fun. The universe will
always show you.
Yes. So humbling, fun, challenging. And I was sore for a week. And I think more than anything, what hooked me is losing to that woman. I'm like, how, like there's something to this mode of working out if this woman is kicking my ass. And I don't like losing. I really, really hate losing. And I just loved the concept of this like buffet of different physical skills that I could focus on, all working towards the same goal, which is CrossFit. All movement is kind of encompassed under this umbrella of CrossFit. And so that was exciting to me. I wanted something physical to do. And it was a very healthy environment, a healthy community of people that were just very optimistic, had a growth mindset that I wanted to surround myself with. And so I started just going a few days a week just to try to get into and stay in shape. And at some point I started doing some local competitions. I didn't know what the CrossFit Games were. My gym had a competition. I did that one. There was another one across town. So I did that one. And at some point I did one of these local ones. And there was this guy named Tommy Hackenbrook who was one of the best of all time at that time. And for the first half of the day, I think it was a 1-day event. For the first half of the day, I was in first. I was beating this guy, Tommy. And then all of the heavy stuff came up and he just destroyed me. But I was in front of him for long enough to catch his attention. And at the end of the event, he invited me and one of my training partners at the current gym to join his gym and to start a team. And so I did. And that year we started a team of 3 guys and 3 girls. That was the team format at that time. And we signed up for the CrossFit Games competition. We did the Worldwide Open where hundreds of thousands of people compete. We made it to the regionals. We placed either first or second at regionals where the top people from, I think there are like 17 regions around the world. We got first or second. We go to the CrossFit Games, which is the international or the world championship, and we got 9th. And then the next year, we did some like actual recruiting where we picked some of the top people all around Utah to come and train with us. And we called it a super team. We thought we were pretty good, but we had no idea actually how good we were. We ended up winning the world championship that year and the following year. And it was for sure the most exciting physical time of my life. And it was just I think it was such a turning point and a transformational point in my life as well. And getting back to your question about what may have made me so good at this sport, I feel like super honored that you say that. To be honest, I was the weak link on our team. I was so like blessed to be a part of this team. But if there was something that made me good at it, I think my background in sports definitely set me up. I played many, many sports competitively my entire life, and a very wide range of them. And actually, I've never had this thought, but I grew up in a really small town and went to a really small school. I didn't graduate high school with my high school because of rehab, but if I would have, it would have been with 70 people. So super small school. Because of that, I was able to start in every sport that I played. If I would have been in a really big city, I probably would have been vying for a starting spot on one sport and I would have had to specialize. But thinking about that now, I think that being able to focus on so many sports and compete at them for so long gave me a really wide base for CrossFit, which is a generalist sport. I was a generalist athlete in high school, and I think that probably transferred. And then it was just something that I could focus my addictive tendency on. I was in college, but I didn't really give a shit about it. And so I just spent all of my waking hours either in AA meetings or in the CrossFit gym. And so some, early childhood preparation mixed with this addictive mentality, I think really set me up. Then another factor that I think really helped me, because I was the youngest on my team by quite a bit, the part that helped me mature and helped me be a great contribution to the team, I think, was my rehab experience. And if there was one thing related to that, it was the ability to ask for help and take direction. Before that time, I was a terrible student in terms of I was not teachable. I did good and I did well in school, but I was just totally unteachable. Then I went through the most humbling experience of my life, and I saw how, what's the opposite of invincible? I saw how fallible and fragile I was, and I learned to take direction from therapists and my parents, etc. I started to see the benefit of being vulnerable enough to just take direction from other people. So I started to take direction from a coach that we had in my CrossFit days, from my older teammates that were all D1 athletes that were just very, very high level competitors. I humbled myself enough to just be a sponge, from them, for the way that they thought about training and recovery and competition, to the level of discipline that they had, to the way that they, the quality of movement that they had. Every little bit of it, I just started to notice. And there was almost no part of me that was too good to learn from them. And that was so different from the boy that I was only a couple of years before.
Do you think that was the fundamental aspect of, because you describe it as a transformational experience? Do you think that's sort of what the fundamental aspect of it, moving from that fixed mindset to that growth mindset?
Yes, I do. I'm hesitant to, I think nature and nurture are both extremely important. I'm definitely hesitant to say oh, my mindset is what did everything, because I think there are some people that could train and have tried to train for a significant period of their life and not accomplish anything in that sport or any other. So my background, my genetics definitely play a role. I'm 5'9", the perfect weight. I was just born for that sport, if you know what I mean. And my mindset played an enormous role for sure.
So what happened after, I think it was 2 years in a row, you've won games champion of your team. What happens after that? Do you keep CrossFitting or do things change?
So in February of that 2013 season, when we're training to try to defend the title, I started to notice numbness below my knees. And it got to the point where I would wake up in the morning and I couldn't feel below my knees in my left leg at all. And I would have to like really warm up to be able to even feel it. And that was scary as hell.
Yeah.
I think I was 21 at the time. And I was like, I should not be feeling anything like this. And I knew exactly what it was. I have a genetic disorder called spondylolisthesis. And I started to have these back spasms when I was 13. It's a very common disorder. I want to say about 10% of people have it. Most people never have any effects from it. They never even know they have it. And I did some physical therapy when I was 13, dealt with it, didn't feel anything related to that for 10 years. So then this pops up and I know exactly what it is. And I go to the doctor that I went to when I was 13. He's a neurosurgeon or orthopedic surgeon, one of the two. And he takes some fresh x-rays and he comes back in the room, and I'll never forget that day. He tells me, Michael, your back is screwed. You're never going to do this. Sounds like so cliche, but he literally said, you'll never do this again. You're going to have a lot of trouble physically for the rest of your life. And we have to do a lumbar fusion on you. It's a huge surgery. I was so devastated because I couldn't compete that year because of the implications for the rest of my life. I was so heartbroken. And so much so that I would go on to get, I think, like 7 different opinions from neurosurgeons and orthopedic surgeons. And I didn't just want one person to give me another opinion, because that would seem like just a bullshit way to operate life. Like I'm just trying to cherry pick the information or the advice that I want. That didn't seem smart, but I wanted to see if I could find consensus. And over time I did. Long story short, enough of the 6 or 7 doctors that I saw told me that I was probably safe enough to finish out the season if I trained in a specific way. I didn't lift over 70% of any of my max lifts for the entire season until the CrossFit Games. And so if I did a number of things exactly right, I should be okay. And then I would probably need surgery after. And so that's exactly what I did. I took it extremely light in terms of the weight that I was lifting during training. And then, we would max out and do the most intense stuff at the competitions. But during training, I would take it lighter. And then the 2013 season ended and I got surgery 6 months later. And it took me about 6 months to recover, but the surgery went perfectly. And to this day, I have not had any back pain whatsoever. I've hit new personal records since then. And I just feel amazing. I chose not to compete anymore in CrossFit. Outside, I did one team competition in 2017, I believe. But for the most part, I've just chose not to compete, partially because my passion had just left for the sport, partially because I just want to be able to go on any adventure I want when I'm, 70, 80, 90 years old. And competing in a fringe sport that I'm not making almost any money in just didn't make the cut anymore.
And what were those 6 months of recovery like for you? Because obviously you're to train for the CrossFits at the level that you were is it's almost like an all-in experience. Like your life is dedicated for this. And then all of a sudden you're getting fusion surgery, like spinal fusion surgery, and you're recovering for 6 months. That's a massive change in lifestyle. Mm-hmm. What's going on in those 6 months?
The first 6 weeks or 8 weeks, I lived with my parents because I couldn't even hardly walk. So I needed help with so many things, and I was in so much pain. And I got incredibly depressed pretty quickly. It was mainly like an identity crisis. Like, who am I if I'm not an athlete? Who am I if I'm not getting the admiration for competing? If I'm not being seen as this physical specimen? Like, what value do I bring to the world? What other skills do I have? And at that time, I genuinely didn't have that many skills that I could have get this external validation from. And so it allowed me to settle into some sense of seeing my worthiness outside of any sort of accomplishments or achievements. I definitely didn't. I wouldn't say I like fully stepped into that, but it started to allow me to see my worth outside of anything external. It also was like a kind of a rebirth experience for me, because I don't know if I was forced. I forced myself to focus on other things. And at that time, I focused on becoming a coach. And I just dove so hard into the coaching world. I became so obsessed. And within a couple years, I was getting people really great results. I became a really well-respected coach in the CrossFit community, in the strength and conditioning community. And it was because of this all of these intense feelings and needing to overcome them, that I was able to have this, what I consider like a pretty healthy obsession in this new realm.
And what was driving that healthy obsession? Because I think, it's interesting to see, when you speak about CrossFit, it's like when you have this, quote unquote, addictive personality, like if you sort of direct it in a more empowering way, you tend to be quite successful. What do you is it similar drivers when you start being a coach, or do you find you're sort of starting to be motivated by more of a healthier drive?
I think, there's like a pattern. There's definitely a pattern in my life, and it's, I think it continues to get healthier and healthier. At that time, I think part of it was a genuine desire to learn. I was really fascinated by how the body worked and how sport performance worked and how to be a part of helping people perform at their best. But then there was also a part of me that saw like another way to get validation. I just had this vision of like, hey, I could get really good at that, and I could still participate in this community that I was getting validation from before. So it was partially about like social acceptance and admiration still. It doesn't negate the curiosity, like the genuine curiosity. It doesn't make it wrong. And that was definitely present. And I don't think I've gotten out of that pattern, like starting something just for, or at least in part for, external validation until Soul Searching Adventures, which I've shared with you. There's always been a good amount of just wanting to be liked and wanting to look good.
Yeah, I find that interesting because I read somewhere, 2017, as you said, you sort of tapped back into the CrossFit space as a competitor, but then you kind of pulled yourself back out of there consciously because you noticed that you had lost that passion for competition and you were mainly more doing it to sort of receive that attention back into your life. So you're very well aware of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am.
It's interesting to be so aware of it, but to still see it be one of the primary drivers in our lives.
Yeah, I can see it usually in retrospect, right? Like after I'm in a social setting and I said something just to look good, or after starting a business months later, seeing what my intentions and motivations were. Maybe I'm getting better at being more aware in the moment. And I imagine if I'm aware in the moment, I probably just choose not to say that thing in the first place.
So let's go into soul searching adventures, because I have a feeling that this is a lot more purpose driven than anything that you've done in your life. Sort of how did this come to be in your life?
It's very full circle for me because my first rehab experience was a wilderness therapy program. I spent 9 weeks in the desert and I learned how to survive outdoors. I learned how to express my emotions, how to give and receive feedback with other men. I learned all of the like soft skills, the emotional intelligence skills as well. Now, whatever, 13, 14 years later, I'm basically teaching the same thing to men. So I take men out on epic outdoor trips, teach them wilderness survival skills, and do a lot of personal development work. And the way that it came about is I was in a leadership course where the leader of the leadership course had us take out this big whiteboard, and he gave us some crayons, and he said, I want you to imagine the most adventurous thing you could create in your career right now. And this idea just flowed out of me within like 15 minutes. And it started as what felt like just a really, really exciting idea. And then what happened was I would just be in the middle of work or in the middle of my day, and all of these ideas were starting to pop up to contribute to this new thing that I wanted to create in my career, which would eventually become Soul Searching Adventures. And that just kept happening. And then I started to plan for the first one. And as I'm sharing the idea with people, my closest friends or people that are more acquaintances are like, that is so you. Like, that is exactly what you need to be doing. And so whether you call it winks from the universe or just like direct reflections from people I care about telling me that this is for me, I felt so validated and I just felt like so on the right track. And I've only done 2 of them so far, but that has been very much the case. I feel like I am just exactly in line with what I'm supposed to be doing in my life in this chapter of my life.
It's very beautiful. So what kind of reflections do you do out there? Because I know it's kind of that array of, you're hiking, you're doing survival stuff, like there's lots of stuff going on, but there's this beautiful element, particularly I think when it comes to men coming together and reflecting and sharing their vulnerabilities through that reflection. What do you think is the more important things to reflect on?
So there are, I bring people to the past, present, and future in terms of their reflections in the categories of work, self or personal, and relationships. So 3 periods of time, 3 different categories. And I can throw out like a couple of the most potent questions that I continue to bring back, that I continue to ask myself. And one is, what is incomplete in your life? And an incompletion is usually about relationships or about projects. The most potent things are conversations that we're putting off. And every time, my belief is that every time something is incomplete in our lives, that it's trapping energy that could be being used for creative purposes, for expressing joy and love. And so I invite people to just sit for quite a while to think about what conversations are you not having? What is incomplete in your life? And when I've asked that of myself, one time, the very first time I asked this of myself, I was in a business that made me a shitload of money for very little work. It was such a good gig. And what came up is that Oh, I'm sorry. I'm conflating two questions. The question was, where am I out of integrity? So maybe I'll get back to where am I incomplete? So where am I out of integrity was the question. And where I was out of integrity was that I was my passion was completely out of this business, and I knew I didn't deserve the amount of money that I was making. And so I called my two business partners at the time and I shared this with them. It was so terrifying because I knew that at some point I would not be, like, the money would go away. It's not a business that I started. So I knew I wasn't going to get bought out. And so the money was going to go away, and it was really scary. But the reward for doing that was coming back into integrity. And the reward of that is just inner peace. Like, I felt so much more comfortable in my own skin. I felt so much more of a man. I felt like I could be trusted, that I could trust myself. And I just felt like a better human being. So that's where am I out of integrity? Like, where am I not acting in line with my values?
And
Sorry, I mixed those up.
No, both are phenomenal. And I certainly use both actually in different ways, but the integrity one I find extremely powerful. It's just your compass. And it's just so easy to just pull yourself back in and just be like, am I in line with what is truly important to me? But as you said, it can be a scary place to live, and it takes a lot of courage. So when you have these reflections with the men in these groups, like when you have discussions, say, like on integrity, do you find that most of the men are obviously like living not complete, like incomplete or out of integrity? Are they conscious of these things and they're just sort of like living like that because they're fearful? Or is it because they just sort of lacked that self-awareness that obviously comes out in something like coming together and reflecting together?
It's a mixed bag. So people are on different places in their personal development journey. So some people are like quite self-aware. Some people are absolute beginners. And then within every single one of us, there are different levels. Like, some things are kind of on the tip of our awareness and some things are deeply unconscious. So I think it really depends on the person. I would say most of it is unconscious. And if it were conscious, at least fully conscious, it would be too painful not to deal with. We deal with pain by covering it up and pushing it to the back of our minds. Like, we just kind of have to do that. If we had, if I cheated on my wife and that was just at the forefront of my head in every conversation with her, it would be debilitating. It would be smothering. It would be just unbearable. And so, without even trying, my mind would create a way to just stuff it away. And so my experience is that most of the things in people's lives are some level of unconscious. They've maybe thought about it before, but then decided, no, I don't have to deal with that because of X, Y, or Z reason. And then sometimes they're complete blind spots. Like, they just have no idea how they're being perceived by others. And it takes someone else in the group sharing something for them to self-reflect and notice, oh shit, I'm doing that same thing, or something very related in my life. I'm doing that same sort of thing.
And when you're speaking about, being incomplete or potentially not in line with integrity, and obviously these things, as you're saying, they've got to do with pain and fear. When it comes to the common theme amongst men so far in these two adventures that you've done, like, is there a common theme of fear that these men are feeling that's stopping them from maybe living the life of integrity that they do want to live?
I don't know if I have an answer to that. That's a great question. The common things that I see, I don't know if this will answer your question, but the common things that I see are that men have a deep fear of not finding their purpose, not finding their calling or that thing that they feel willing to die for or willing to sacrifice for. And very few men that I've met have really found that. And some of the things that get in their way are fear of doing something that seems like against the grain or too self-expressive. Like some of the things that really light people up are like creating art. And in our society, especially for men, we're not in a society that really values art that much. And so that's really scary for a lot of guys to like imagine themselves spending a significant amount of time writing or creating music or something like that. So it's that they won't find their purpose. It's also that they won't find their tribe, their community. A lot of guys that I've had on these trips have a lot of friends, but they really, really desire a deeper, just deeper relationships and a feeling of community. And we also haven't been taught how to do that very well either. And I think some of the things that are getting in the way of that are, for men are just the common things that we're starting to hear more, like men aren't supposed to be emotional, especially with each other. We're not supposed to be self-expressed. And then we're in such an isolated society, right? We have our big home separated from everyone else. We have all of these conveniences where it helps us save time, but causes us not to see people as often. And so all of those factors lead to it being just much harder to create a really deep sense of community.
Yeah, it really is that element of vulnerability that I think kind of ties everything together. I've worked or coached a few like high achieving men, and I find that, performance is such a valued thing when it comes to men, and that they're almost willing to sacrifice some of their integrity to ensure that they continue sort of on the train of becoming or performing more or achieving more, or more money and like more admiration and validation and all these things. And it's interesting because at the very core, like you're saying, they want that element of vulnerability and community and coming together and self-expressing, but they're just like totally on different train tracks because of,
yes,
I guess, the society, so right? And in terms of what you're sharing is like, this is what they've been conditioned to, because this is what we celebrate in them.
Yeah. For me, it's made it so important for me to pay attention who I look up to. If I'm looking up to people that are just always striving and chasing money or making a quote unquote bigger impact, rather than people that seem like really in touch with, I don't know, what is physically present for them, people that live a slower, simpler life, people that live their life with integrity, it makes it much harder for me to stay on my path. That's been a huge one. And then also just spending time really listening to intuition, first valuing it in the first place, and then having the courage to listen to it. One thing that I've learned big time since COVID started is something like no one knows what's really going on. All of the people that I've always looked up to, they also don't know what's going on. And so if anyone knows what's right for me, it's me. And it's given me permission to really start to spend more time with my own thoughts, with my own feelings or intuitions about, how I want to behave or a decision that I want to make. And by having that kind of tilt for long enough, it's given me the courage to actually follow through with that.
Yeah, I love that you've mentioned intuition. Recently, I was just like so in my head about something and I was trying to make a decision and I just could not get the clarity. And it was really frustrating and overwhelming. And I'm sure you can relate, when you're in your head, it's just like, I just need the answer. And I sat with myself and I very intentionally was like, all right, let's be intuitive about this. Let's see, if I can sort of get the answer through feeling rather than thinking, and like straight away, it's just there all the time. And
yeah, that's great.
and it's so interesting that we don't tend to value it as much, and we will go to great lengths and stress to try and find, to cognitively come to answers that we really have within us all the time.
Amen.
Well, thank you for this beautiful conversation. I've just thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you for being yourself so vulnerable. I think that there particularly are men listening that will feel a sense of connection with you. And, for anyone that is over in America, I certainly recommend getting in touch with Mike in relation to soul searching adventures. I know myself personally, if I was a man and if I was in America, I would certainly be on that bandwagon and being a part of it. So thank you for that. And thank you for starting to live your purpose, because I know that you're going to change many lives.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I feel super honored.
You're very welcome. So on a final note, Mike, I would love to ask you, what does it mean to you to be human?
It means experiencing the full range of emotion, for one. So everything from joy and exhilaration and love to grief and sadness and terror. I think, one thing that's been really present for me the past couple of years, especially just feeling how much I miss my family back in Louisiana and starting to consider really close family members passing away at some point. I've gotten in so much closer touch with my own grief. And that has been such a beautiful experience. And what it's taught me is that our level, the ability or the range at which we're willing to feel some of these negative emotions like grief is the extent that we're able to feel things like joy and love. It's like it carves these grooves through our psyches that then all of those yummy feelings can kind of fill in later. And they are valuable and beautiful to experience in and of themselves. One thing that I've come across a bunch lately is that grief is somehow connected to what is sacred. Anytime I'm feeling genuine grief, I can be present to a sense of like awe and wonder for the entire universe. And I can't really explain that, but it just helps me really connect to some sort of higher power. And so at least part of what it means to be human is to allow ourselves to experience the full range and not to make any one of them better, not to put any of them on a pedestal, to always welcome and embrace whatever is present for us. I think I'll leave it at that.